Hi, this is Paul. I wanted to do a little update on the Jordan Peterson event from last night. This probably won't be the end of my thoughts, but just the beginning. I've just been a little busy today. It was a late night. But Jordan Peterson came to Sacramento yesterday as part of his book tour. So in this video, I want to talk about the offline magical mystery tour, the constant conversation of who was in the crowd, some notable takeaways that I left with, just first impressions, and some personal impressions, and then a little bit of follow-up. So let's get down to business. This is supposed to be a book tour, but I don't really think it's a book tour. This is the auspices of a book tour, and he does talk about his book, but I think this is in some ways kind of a third wave of Jordan Peterson. We've had the classroom lectures, which all of the Jordan Peterson followers watch diligently, the Maps of Meaning and the Personalities course. And then there's the biblical series. Now he said the biblical series is going to start again in November. So let's hope that comes off. I know a lot of you are waiting for the biblical series to commence when he starts in on Exodus. But I really think this is the Jordan B. Peterson Roadshow, because what he's pretty much doing is thinking on his feet, and he feeds off an audience, and this is often him at his best. He's evolving as he goes, and you can see development in his thought. He's basically giving us what's on his head now, and he's filtering it through all of the past stuff that he's written about and done. So it certainly touches on the books, and it certainly gives us an up-to-date idea of where his thought is at. I really wish he would put this into podcast form. I appreciate the fact that doing high-quality video at events like this would be difficult, but given the fact that he's mostly talking and answering questions, he could easily record these things and just string them out every day as a podcast, and I think there would be an eager group of listeners, including myself, who would, hear the updates. A lot of and I know a lot of people would hear this and say, oh, there's a lot of repetition. Oh, he said this stuff before. And that's all true. The main purpose of this is obviously, well, it's not obvious what the main purpose of this tour is. I think it just fits with him, and it fits with his mission to influence large numbers of people the best he can. But again, I think if they're not recording these, I think we're missing some important evolution of his thoughts, because as someone who's followed him closely, I can see his thinking evolve on things. And I think the pushback and the combat that he's been getting is sharpening him and forcing him to develop and refine some things and fine-tune some of his language. Now, this event happened the day after Aspen, and he began by talking about how he got pigeonholed by someone at Aspen, and they wanted to know his political views and his policy ideas, and he keeps resisting that this isn't political. Now, I know there's a difference of opinion on that, and in fact, before the event, we had this specific conversation with one of the members of the Sacramento Meetup, and he was kind of calling BS on some of this non-political stuff. But I'm still on the fence. I think he clearly wants to have an impact in politics, but I would agree with Peterson that his main focus, he's not intending to directly look at politics. His point is that for those people for whom all things are political, everything sounds political. And my point would be for people who lose their religion, so often politics becomes their religion. And so I don't think Peterson, I'm not ready to go as far as my friend on this. This will probably be a hot topic tonight at the Jordan Peterson meetup here in Sacramento. If you're curious about the content of his talk in Sacramento, listen to the points that he made at Aspen. Now, John McWhorter, who is a favorite of mine in talking about race, clearly asked a question. You're not going to mistake John McWhorter, his voice and the kind of things he says. But he asked a question, and he and Peterson had a little bit of back and forth on some things. And it comes after about an hour into the video, and it's worth listening to. I haven't actually listened to the whole video yet. I started this morning, but I've had work and a lot of emails and just been busy today. And so I only have so much time to give every day to the Jordan Peterson project. Now, one of the things that I noted is that he used to be talking about the divine individual. And this is, I think, again, an example of some of the fine-tuning of his language. He's talking about the sovereign individual. It came up also that he notes that, especially amongst Christians, Jews, and Muslims, the divine is hedged and limited in a way that New Agers or Hindus or Buddhists don't do it. It's this radical separation between creator and creature, between divine and secular. And so he's clearly thinking about these things and working them out. And this is why I would love to see a podcast of these talks, because I think we would better be able to track the development of his thought. Now, I think a fair rebuttal would be, yeah, but these are on-the-fly thoughts. And I would answer back, yeah, but you're doing it in front of 3,000 people. So how on the fly can it be? But once again, this is Peterson talking out loud. This is how he thinks through things, and perhaps a critical piece of his own development and a critical piece of his mission. And it's just terribly efficient. I don't have 3,000 people waiting to listen to me. There are 50 people in my church on Sunday listening to me. So good seats are all available, and they're for free if you're in Sacramento. But this is a very efficient way for him to continue to refine his thinking, retool his language, get a sense of what people are doing. And he gets energized from it. So that was one example. He does revisit a lot of the main points from 12 Rules for Life. During the question and answer, he addressed some of the Bernie Schiff things, and I thought he was quite generous in that. And I was pleased by the tone that he took. That obviously was a painful thing to have a friend say the kind of things his friend did in the way he said them. He talked about what he said before, that he has some other friends who are very smart, who listen to everything he says and won't pull their punches and come after him to correct him. I would imagine those friends have a hard time keeping up listening to everything that he says, because he talks so much, but maybe that's a piece of the podcast thing too. One of the regular topics on the Meetup is how's he looking? Is he tired? Is he overdoing it? Is he going to collapse? Is he mentally, is his wife keeping his head together? What about his diet? There's this personality layer to the Jordan Peterson conversation. He was the best I've seen him in video or live. This is the second time I've seen him live. I obviously had that one video conversation with him, and I've obviously watched a lot of video with him. He was sharp. He was happy. There's Quentin Schultz has a little video. Quentin Schultz taught communication at Calvin College. He has a little video critiquing Jordan Peterson. A lot of the critiques of Jordan Peterson's speaking style that Quentin Schultz brought up, he was a professor of communications, were there tonight. He looked down too much. He wasn't angry at all. He wasn't defensive at all. He was magnanimous. He had the little areas that he gets his digs in, and there's some applause lines in there. But for the most part, someone asked me via email, did he meet expectations? Peterson, for me, exceeded expectations in this performance. And, he's on stage. That part of the evening is very much a performance, and it's a very loving crowd. It's a wonderful crowd to speak to. He's being very supported. And so I think, as he said later in the questions and answers, doing these events for him energizes him, encourages him, and I can very much see that. Now, these events aren't cheap. I dropped somewhere close to, I dropped a fair amount of money, and actually a friend has volunteered to subsidize my tickets last night, which was extremely generous. And my wife came with me. She hasn't looked much into Peterson. She's heard me talk about him. She doesn't watch my videos, and a little bit more on her impressions a little bit later. I think he and Rubin have things pretty much dialed in. There's actually not a lot of Dave Rubin in the show. It's pretty generous of Dave Rubin to do this with him, and I'm sure he's getting paid for it, and well paid. These events absolutely generate money for all parties concerned. But I think if I were Dave Rubin, I'd probably get a little tired of following Jordan Peterson around and just warming up the crowd a bit with some things. I could have some comments about what Dave Rubin said, and maybe I will in a later video. He started late. Both of the events I've been to have started late. That might be they're waiting for the crowd. There were big lines coming in, and so who knows? But they did in fact start late. Peterson's main talk was about an hour or so, and again it was him thinking out loud. And again, I think this is one of the best things he does, is think out loud on the fly. This is what's got him to this point. I don't think he's going to stop now. There was question and answer that Dave Rubin had for another half hour, and that was a good time too. I thought that went very well. Then after that, there are the VIP picks for another hour, about 160 VIPs. Boy, that's a lot for what you're charging. And a couple more comments on that in a couple minutes. And then another half hour of smaller Q&A, which I thought was really terrific. Again, this is a university professor, and maybe 60 people stayed of the 160 for the extended question and answer. And it was really wonderful. The crowd, everyone wants to talk about the crowd at these events. It was big. I think they just about sold out the place, and it was a big auditorium. And Sacramento is a medium-sized city. Dave Rubin said this is the first time he'd ever been to Sacramento. Sacramento tends to have a little bit of an inferiority complex compared to the big metropolitan areas of the Bay Area and Southern California, which are enormous. So Sacramento, sometimes called Cowtown by some people. So at Kings games, they used to bring cowbells when we played the Lakers. The crowd was youngish. It was whitish. There were no protesters like there were in Portland. My wife met some buddies who she didn't know were into Jordan Peterson, and I found that to be interesting, because these buddies of hers aren't necessarily in my circles. They're in another circle of my wife's. And I found that noteworthy, and it talks to me about how broad Jamie Smith in a tweet, got into a little tangle with Jamie Smith in a tweet over how broad Peterson's audience is. It's getting broader. It continues to grow. Peterson has tended to get bumps in fights that he's had, but I think there is continued growth in his influence. And there's certainly negatives have risen too, but I think the audience is growing. Sacramento's a very diverse town. I thought the audience was a little whitish. It doesn't mean that there weren't non-white people there. There were plenty, but just kind of my metric of looking around. I did note that the line for the men's room was long and there wasn't for the ladies' room. And one thing about the venue that Peterson was in, I've been to this venue for other events, and the venue doesn't have enough bathrooms for the size of the auditorium. And so usually there's lines coming out of the women's room. And so that spoke to me probably, again, a little bit more male than female, because usually there's no line in the men's room for biological reasons that separate the sexes. I'll leave it at that. Some takeaways in the question and answer. Someone asked, favorite archetypal movie? Groundhog Day, which I thought was a great choice. It's a favorite film of mine, and a really wonderful film. He's using a Surface Book. I'm kind of I follow technology too, and so I found that to be interesting. He's using a Surface Book. The biggest takeaway of the night for me was someone asked the resurrection question again, and I kind of thought, he's going to wave this one off, but he didn't. He gave the fullest answer that I've heard, and again, I would love it if this were out in a podcast form, because he really dug into it a little bit, and he talked about the fact that he hasn't had enough time to look at the theology and the doctrine around it. And I actually, one of the little things that I told him in my 30 seconds with him on the resurrection, I said, I'm glad that you talked about that. Read N.T. Wright's The Resurrection of the Son of God, because that's one of the fullest tomes, and I think that would give Peterson a bigger view, a historical view of it, because N.T. Wright is a historian. And he said, it's sitting on my shelf. So super happy to hear that. He talked about how he's not going to pass judgment on it one way or the other, because when he does the biblical series, he tries to line up the layer of the text, layer's my word, the aspect of the text, the biological truth, he's trying to line up these layers, and he does that because of the various ways that he approaches, and he talks about this in his other videos. If something is real to my eyes, if it's real to my nose, if it's real to my senses, if it's real to my ears, this multiple factor authentication, as it were. And so I might talk about that further in a later video, his treatment of it. Curious about newbies. Like I said, my wife came with me, and she hasn't done much of this. And so she was kind of my guinea pig, because she hasn't sit down and listened to an hour or so of Peterson. And so I suspect that in many cases you have often men who are Jordan Peterson fans. One of our Meetup people is a woman who brought her boyfriend, but I brought my wife. And I was really curious how she would respond. And she left very impressed. She was curious. She was probably going to dig into 12 Rules for Life. She made connections between what he said and some things that she's interested in. And now my wife and I disagree on a lot. I don't like to talk too much about her. I like to respect her need for privacy, but my wife and I disagree on a lot, and my family members, my children and I disagree on a lot, and that's okay. I actually think we grow in challenges of differentiation when we have to live and love people that we disagree with. And this, I maybe should credit disagreements with my family as helping me cultivate a sense of openness and generosity. And I also frankly credit Christianity for this, because instinctively, naturally, it's easy to separate and to destroy bonds and to turn away from people with whom we have significant disagreements. But my wife left very impressed with the man, and she really liked him. And that said something to me about the value of this tour and the value of getting him live in front of an audience and just letting him do his thing. And so, again, exceeded expectation. And so I think this venue is not the right word. I think this mode is a good way to continue to grow his influence and to further his agenda. So afterwards, there's the VIP thing, where you line up. If you paid the extra chunk of change for the VIP thing, you and 160 of your closest friends line up, and the poor guy stands there and gets his picture taken 160 times, mostly with total strangers. So then once I was fairly early in the line, and so once afterwards you sit down and you chit chat and so on and so forth. But I watched him go through this line, and I was deeply impressed I know something of what it means. I know what it's like to be doing what he's done, because I'm a pastor. Now, I don't speak to audiences of 3,000 people. I haven't ever spoken to an audience of 3,000 people. My church itself is quite small, but I know what it's like to talk continually for an hour in Sunday school. You can see me do it. You can see me do it on my church channel. I know what it's like to preach a sermon and to respond to people and to shake hands and so after all of that, at the end of the day, for him to genuinely, in a friendly way, pause. And there are people, I watched the line, and as a pastor, I'm a watcher of people, and there are Peterson might not know these people, but these people, Peterson is important to them, and that's a big deal. And it would be easy now, as a famous celebrity, to blow off or cocoon or isolate himself from these people, but he doesn't. That speaks volumes to me about him. Okay? There's a lot of cheap hits going out on him. There's a lot of talk about him being disingenuous. You can talk about Bill Clinton shedding a tear, then walking away and laughing. I watch people for a living, and I have plenty of opportunity to smell rats and frauds. And, I'm not infallible, but I think I'm a pretty good reader of people. And pretty impressed how he handled people one-on-one, did that soul-straining thing of getting your picture taken with 160 total strangers, and to do this night after night, and then afterwards to answer questions. So that was my biggest impression of the night, and that endeared me tremendously to him and impressed me tremendously, because I know how hard that is. And again, some people say, Paul, you're too nice to people. You're too nice to people in the comment section. You're too nice to Sam Harris. I know some of you don't think I'm nice enough to Sam Harris, but that's the way it is. But this capacity, if you're going to preach, and he is preaching, if you're going to preach about the sovereignty of the individual, and about in other words, the imago Dei, and about the value of the individual, you have to practice it in your life. And his place in a hierarchy now severely strains his ability to do so. I was talking to another one of the Meetup people who knows quite a bit about C.S. Lewis, and she said, C.S. Lewis towards the end of his life, trying to do right by his fans, nearly killed him. And so, I can't say enough about this, that I was really moved by watching him. Now, my wife didn't want to get her picture taken, because she's a private person. She says, get your picture taken with someone you don't know. It's just kind of weird. Yeah, it's weird. It feels like a fanboy, but I was kind of curious. I know some of you watch my YouTubes, and just watching me on YouTube, you might think I'm a big wheel. I am not a big wheel, baby. My little YouTube channel is a small deal, and Jordan Peterson is crazy busy with way up on the hierarchy. And remember, the hierarchies filter, and they bind and they blind and all of that, and he's in the middle of that. And yes, I had a little conversation with him, and yes, I make videos about him, and yes, a couple of times he's tweeted my videos, and all of that is fine and good. But again, I know what it's like to have to deal with a line of people and to try to remember names. I don't think he remembered my name, but he looked at me and he paused and he recognized me and he asked me how my YouTube channel is going. And I thought, doggone it, man, that's impressive. That is impressive. And again, some of the haters out there, hate away. I don't care. But I was touched by that. He doesn't have to do any of this. And yeah, he's getting money from it. And yeah, OMG, ooh, that's just kind of grinding and so on and so forth. But I also know that this is, and I'm learning this even with my tiny, tiny little level of celebrity. When people pay attention to you and they devote some of their time to you, you should say thank you, because not all of us have the same amount of money, but all of us have 24 hours in a day. And people matter, okay? People matter. That's what this should be about. And good for him. Good for him. Whatever you think about his beliefs, that's solid. So I got my little picture taken with him, and yes, I am tall. He's not standing on a box. I'm not that tall, but yes, I am tall. Now, Meetup tonight in Sacramento. Today is the 28th, and we'll be talking about it. You might know Bucko isn't back here. Bucko went to the event, and then Bucko had a sleepover at another one of our Meetouts homes, and he's out of the austerity of the pastor's office, and he's whooping it up. He's having a beer. He's chomping down dog biscuits. Looks like he was put to work. Maybe he didn't have money to pay for the beer, so he's doing a little electronics work. But if you're in Sacramento, one of the things that struck me is we had a little meetup before at a restaurant and enjoyed a meal together. Seeing all of the fans in Sacramento made me realize how small my meetup is. And then someone said, well, maybe we should advertise. And part of me thought, I don't know if I want to advertise. I'm a pastor of a small church. I enjoy getting to know people, and I can't always remember names, but I do recognize faces. And right now we have them twice a month. Maybe we'll go more if there's demand, but these meetups are a highlight of my month, and making new friends with other Jordan Peterson fans. And we're still trying to tinker with and retool how we do it, because of course some people talk more than others, and so on and so forth. And just having a wide-ranging conversation with 12 people isn't necessarily easy, and the most assertive and aggressive tend to put forward, and so maybe we'll tinker with that. But if you're in Sacramento, love to have you come down. If you're in Northern California, try and find, we have some that come up from Fresno, some from the Bay Area. Find a way to carpool, because it's a good time. It's a good time. And I did an interview with a very conservative Reformed magazine, a reporter from a Reformed magazine today, and she asked me, what should people do? And I think you should start meetups. I think you should. One of the things I hear again and again is I don't have anyone to talk about Jordan Peterson with. And a big part of this is free speech. And if you listen to Jordan Peterson, we think by talking. So find people to talk with. So gather in meetups and get together and talk about this and make new friends and treat people well. So there's my report from last night's shindigs. Let me know in the comment section. Hopefully I'll get this out tonight before the meetup.